Cape Farewell, about 10 years ago, I came to this world of climate as an artist. And I was amazed that, the scientists I was working with, they were desperate. They knew that they had a serious problem on their hands, but they couldn't find a way of actually getting it into the media or getting it into the public. And part of the problem was, seeing it from my side, who handles quite a lot of the media, is that they were talking in terms of graphs, in terms of data. So I said, well, okay, look, let's try and combine the creative sector, try and get all of the artists involved. I mean, artists meaning all of the creative sector, and say, okay, can you join forces with the scientists, learn what their problem is, understand what they're saying, and actually create a new language that will deal with climate change. And in a way, this is what I'm going to show you is how they've gone through that process and how it succeeded. Part of the process is that how do you inspire artists to actually make work? Well, in this case, what we did was we chartered a beautiful old 100-year-old schooner, and we went far up into the Arctic, and we put the artists and the scientists working together. And from that process, they actually said, well, okay, then they came back, they've created, and they've made work. Now, this has been a fantastic conference. I really take my hand off to Christine for making such a stimulating debate. But it is serious. The debate yesterday from the scientists was saying, wait a minute, we've got this 10-year kind of gap of where we've really got to achieve change, and with the policymakers. So it's getting even more important that we ramp this up and get it into the media, get it into the public domain, so that they can drive the conversation. So, the essence is there, but what you've got to understand is you can't preach to people. You can't say, look, this is really serious, you've got to get involved, because they won't do it. The work we've done here in the last 2 days is fantastic, but the real work starts when everybody goes outside of that door and engages with the populations and engages with the politicians to actually deliver change. And that's when the hard work begins. So part of Cape Farewell is that it has to continue with continuing the process. That's actually me up there being very cold. So if you think I've got an easy job, sometimes it's not so easy. The scientists we work with are great. They're oceanographers. They work in the bioceanography. They work in geology. They work in atmospherics. What is interesting this is about scientists working in the field. And when the scientists are actually working in the process, you actually then put the artist in there together, and you find the two work processes incredibly similar. So it's actually quite an inspiration for the artist to kind of go, wait a minute, now I understand how they get the data, how they get the information. So that's how it's driven this forward, and getting the engagement. And then they come up with very complicated things like that. That is a cross-section of the Gulf Stream, or the Norwegian current, pretty much at the 80th parallel north. It's a real piece of science, so we're actually delivering real science. But the messaging behind that is, that's about 150 kilometers across. It's the size of something like 6 Amazons. To generate the kind of heat that is in that sort of kind of cross-section of this river going north is quite extraordinary. Now, why is it important? Well, this is one of the major systems, the natural systems that govern the planet. If it fails, then we've got real problems and the whole process accelerates. Now, one of the other major systems up there, as you all talked about over the last few days, is what's happening at the North Pole, is the ice melting. And in 2007, when this picture was taken, and again this year in 2009, we both ran into ice, we sailed through ice. And the reason is that actually what is happening is that the ice at the North Pole is breaking up. Now, this is serious. This is pretty much all first-year ice that's up there. It used to be 8, 9-year-old ice, so it's all new ice. This is 2007. The pink line is where the ice should be. 25% of it disappeared. It is exactly the same this year. And the idea was that when I started in 2003, the modeling said, maybe in 60 years' time there won't be any ice at the North Pole in the summer. And it now looks like maybe in 6 years there won't be any ice at the North Pole in the summer. So again, the speed of the change is happening much faster than even the scientists predicted. And we have to get on board. Now, I'm just going to run... just before we do that, you think, ice at the North Pole, that's not important. We've also been to the Andes, and this is in the Andes in Peru. Now, what they're looking at is an absolutely beatific scene. It's absolutely gorgeous. except it should be a glacier. In that valley, with that lake, should be a glacier. 10, 15 years ago, there was a glacier. And how does it matter? Well, this really is going to affect the populations of Lima and of the whole farming area of Peru. They are dependent on their water supply by the glacial melt from the Andes. And as you can see, the glaciers are going, and they've gone fast. And the same is happening in the Himalayas. So this is beginning to have real effect on huge populations. And if you kind of rob a city of sort of 15 million take the water supply away, it doesn't take much imagination to feel the size of the consequences. Ian McEwan, I don't know if you know him, but he's a writer, very famous author in Europe, so you probably know book. He's just made a new book, but he was up with us in 2005, and this is a short little bit of film.
I thought maybe I should approach this as a dilemma, really, about long-term interests. We've got ourselves in a situation where we are having to address the needs of people unborn, not our own children, maybe not even our children's children, but generations after that. Even the most idealistic of thinkers and actors on the world stage in the past have really addressed themselves to problems in the present. To bear the weight of the future in this way is both interesting and difficult, and runs probably counter to our nature. And so I was wondering if there was some way into this subject artistically that would look at it sympathetically from the point of view of that impulse in us that refuses to do this. Strange to say this, get on the polluter's side, as it were. I mean, that includes all of us. The consumer, the polluter, the despoiler. And we're all sort of weak and lazy and stupid in this respect.
This is a very human response. When this film was made in 2005, and as Ian was saying, my grandchildren, the great-grandchildren will be affected. And everybody's been recently talking about, well, my children, the next generation will be affected. So again, the time is accelerated. When Ian was, when he came back from the Arctic, he was deeply moved. He was very engaged, and he went, okay, how can I write a novel about this? And for about 2 or 3 years afterwards, he said, David, I just can't find a way of making this into a novelistic form. I can't make it into a novel story. And then suddenly he figured it. He cracked it and spent 2 years writing this book solo, which is fantastic because it then gets out. It's a really big way of communicating with the public worldwide. At the same time, he was 10 minutes on a news item in the UK, and they were interviewing him about climate change. So suddenly you have a language of dealing with the media that is very, very different than the language of the scientists talking. But he is very well informed, as you can see when you read the book. So it's, again, a very informed person talking in a different way, communicating with the public and ramping them up and saying, wait a minute, this is important, you've got to get engaged. Now the next little bit of film is by a poet. How can a poet get engaged? Well, this is Lem Sisse, and he did a really interesting, it's a very short 2.5 minute film.